7 years after her husband and daughter vanished in Kotor, the investigation was being shut down. The official line was that the father and daughter walked off a cruise to start a new life, was about to be stamped permanent. Jurisdictional tangles between the Montenegrin police, the cruise line's flag state, and Interpol had quickly cooled the case into a permanent state of bureaucratic frost. The narrative they settled on was easier. Not an abduction in broad daylight, but a family who chose to disappear. A clean explanation for the impossible. Mara, he began, forgoing the formal Mrs. Lopez they had used for the first few years. His voice was gentle, tinged with the exhaustion of a marathon runner who sees no finish line. I'm afraid we've reached a point where we need to discuss the future of the case. Mara's heart, a muscle long accustomed to clenching, tightened in her chest. She forced her hands to remain steady in her lap. At 49, she looked a decade older, the profound loss carved into the fine lines around her eyes and mouth. "What do you mean, Evan?" she asked, her voice a low, controlled whisper. Rourke ran a hand through his thinning, gray hair, a gesture she knew meant he was delivering bad news. "It's been 7 years. We've chased every lead, every whisper, from Athens to Zagreb. Interpol has officially deprioritized the file. Resources are being shifted. The case is, for all intents and purposes, being moved to inactive status." A tremor of rage, hot and sharp, shot through her. "Inactive?" Her voice rose, losing its careful composure. You can't just give up. Lila is 25 now. Armin, they are out there. Someone might see one of the posters, the website. We can't stop." Her gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, crowded with photographs of the family that was. Lila, laughing on a sailboat, Armin with his arm around Mara, their smiles a brutal contrast to the room's suffocating quiet. Rourke's eyes softened, but his resolve was firm. "I understand, but you have to see our position. The official conclusion, based on the lack of any evidence of foul play at the port, was that they left of their own accord. We've spent thousands of man-hours refuting that for you, but without new information." He gestured to the thick binder on her coffee table, a testament to 7 years of dead ends and false hope. "It's taking resources from active cases, abductions, murders." Her eyes fell to the binder, its pages filled with shipping manifests, witness statements from tourists who remembered nothing, and grainy CCTV stills from the port of Kotor that showed only crowds. She reached out, her fingers brushing the worn cardboard. "All this work," she murmured, "it can't be for nothing." He leaned back, his expression grim. "Walk me through it again. One more time. Sometimes a fresh look." She nodded, taking a steadying breath. She had recited this story until the words felt smooth and meaningless, like river stones. Each telling was a fresh haunting, but she clung to the belief that one small, forgotten detail might be the key. "We were on an Aegean cruise," she began, her voice becoming distant, pulling the memory from the fog. "It was our anniversary, something we had planned for years. The scent of salt and diesel, the cry of gulls, the warmth of the Montenegrin sun, it all came rushing back, a phantom limb of a perfect day. We had docked in Kotor. We were at a small cafe in the old town near the water. The cobblestones, the terracotta roofs. It was beautiful." Her voice caught. "Lila, she wanted to walk to a small shop she'd seen to buy a souvenir. She was 18. It was broad daylight, crowded. We thought it was perfectly safe." Rourke listened, his pen scratching against his notepad, the sound loud in the silent room. "Armin and I finished our coffee. 15, maybe 20 minutes passed. She wasn't back. Armin said he'd go find her while I paid the bill. I saw him walk out of the cafe, pulling out his phone. I assumed he was calling her." Mara's hands began to tremble. "He never came back. Neither of them. I searched the port, the market, the narrow streets for hours. I called their phones until the batteries must have died. By the time the ship was scheduled to depart, I was frantic. I reported it to the ship's security. The memory of that panic was still visceral. The crew's polite but firm insistence that she reboard, the promises to contact local authorities, her terror at leaving them behind on that island. The jurisdictional nightmare had begun at that moment. The Montenegrin authorities were slow to react. The ship was in international waters by the next morning, and the case had become a hot potato of responsibility that everyone dropped. "We've maintained contact with the authorities in KOTOR and with Interpol all these years," Rourke said, pulling a formal-looking document from his briefcase. "Their names and details are in every relevant database, flagged." A flicker of hope ignited in her chest. "So they are still looking?" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "As I said, the file's priority has been lowered. Without new evidence, it becomes exponentially harder to solve with each passing year. They will notify us if anything develops." The hope dimmed, but did not die. She straightened her back, her voice finding a new steely edge. "I'll hire private investigators. I'll pay more, whatever it takes. Just don't let it go cold." Rourke shook his head, his expression softening with pity, an emotion she could not bear. "It's not about money, Mara. We have to be realistic." "How can they be found if no one is actively looking for them?" she interrupted, the calm facade she had maintained for years finally cracking, revealing the raw, ragged grief beneath. He stood, gathering his papers, a movement that signaled the end. "I promise you, my team here will keep the file open on our end. If anyone comes forward, we will follow up. But I can't authorize more active resources without a credible lead." As he walked to the door, he turned back. "Stay strong, Mara." With those final hollow words, he was gone. Mara sat motionless, surrounded by the ghosts of her family and the dying embers of her case. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked on, a relentless metronome marking the time they had been gone. She stared at the stack of freshly printed missing person posters by her printer, Lila and Armin's faces smiling out at her, frozen in a time before the world had cracked open. With a deep, shuddering breath, she rose and gathered the posters, sliding them into a large envelope. The routine was a grim comfort. She grabbed her purse and keys, pausing at the hallway mirror. The woman who stared back was a stranger, tired, worn, her hair streaked with a gray that had appeared almost overnight 7 years ago. Outside, the Florida humidity was a heavy blanket. She got into her car, her eyes immediately finding the photograph tucked into the sun visor. It was from the cruise, taken by the ship's photographer just hours before they docked in KOTOR. The three of them, squinting in the bright sun, their faces alight with a joy that now seemed like a cruel joke. Lila was wearing the seashell pendant Mara had bought her at a market in Athens a few days earlier. A tidal wave of grief, anger, and loss crashed over her. Her hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. A raw, primal scream tore from her throat as she pounded her fists against the wheel, years of suppressed anguish erupting in a torrent of tears. "Why?" she sobbed, her voice hoarse. "Why did we go on that damn cruise? We should have stayed home." For several minutes, she allowed herself to break, to feel the full weight of the catastrophe that had defined her life. The cruise ship, once a symbol of celebration, had become the focal point of all her regret. When the storm of emotion subsided, she dabbed at her eyes with the back of her hand, taking deep, shaky breaths. "Get it together, Mara," she muttered. "They need you to be strong." With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone, intending to set the GPS for a new town to paper with posters, to do the only thing she knew how to do. But as she held it, the screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, a country code she didn't recognize. The call was routed through the car's Bluetooth. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" Her voice was raspy. "Is this Mara Lopez?" a woman's voice asked, her English precise, with a distinct European accent. "Yes, this is she," Mara replied, a flicker of curiosity cutting through her exhaustion. "Mrs. Lopez, my name is Sophie Van Dyke. I'm calling from Amsterdam. I believe I have just seen your daughter, Lila." Mara's heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs. A flood of hope and deep ingrained skepticism washed over her. She had been down this road before. Cruel hoaxes, extortion attempts, the well-meaning but mistaken. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone weary, defensive. "I don't have the energy for this. Please don't." She moved her finger to end the call. "Please, Mrs. Lopez, listen." The woman's voice came through, more insistent. "I am not asking for money. Just give me 1 minute. I saw the posters when I was working in the United States. I remember her face. But it's not just that. She was wearing a very distinctive necklace, a small, iridescent seashell on a silver chain." The world tilted. The seashell pendant, the one from the Athens market, the one in the photograph on her sun visor. A detail that had never been released to the public, a detail only she would know to look for. Her breath caught in her throat. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm listening." The woman, Sophie, took a deep breath. "I was a project manager for an NGO. I was based in Orlando for 6 years. I only returned home to Amsterdam a few months ago. Your daughter's case was major news when it first happened. I saw her face on posters so many times it became etched in my memory. The golden brown hair, the almond-shaped eyes." Mara's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Where did you see her?" "At a small bar, not far from the city center. She was with a man." Mara's mind leaped to Armand. Could it be? Had they been there all this time? But when she asked for a description, the fragile hope fractured. "He was much younger, aggressive-looking, Eastern European, I think," Sophie said. A whirlwind of questions spun in Mara's mind. If it was Lila, where was Armand? What had happened to them? Despite the crushing weight of her skepticism, she couldn't ignore the detail of the pendant. It was a lock that only this key could fit. "Ms. Van Dyke," Mara said, her voice finding a sudden, sharp clarity. "I need you to do something for me. If you are serious about this, please go to the nearest Amsterdam police station and file a formal report. My detective here is connected to them through Interpol. A report from you will be flagged and will force them to look." Sophie's response was immediate. "Of course, Mrs. Lopez, I will go right now." As the call was about to end, Mara asked one last question, her voice trembling. "Are you certain it was her?" There was a short pause. "I am 90% sure," Sophie replied, her tone firm and supportive. "And if you decide to come, please call me. We can meet. I will help you in any way I can." Mara ended the call, her body thrumming with an adrenaline she hadn't felt in years. She sat in her car, the engine silent. Part of her wanted to laugh at the sheer insanity of it, flying halfway across the world on the word of a stranger. But another part, the part that had refused to die over 7 long years, was already checking flight schedules. She remembered a false lead 3 years prior, a young man who claimed to have seen Lila in Hawaii. That wild goose chase had ended in a motel room in Maui where she'd been robbed, the incident leaving her more heartbroken and cynical than ever. But this felt different. Sophie sounded sincere, grounded. The detail of the pendant was everything. With Interpol deprioritizing the case and Rourke giving her hollow promises, she knew she was on her own. If she didn't take this seriously, no one would. She started the car, but instead of driving to a new town with her posters, she drove straight to the police station. She dialed Detective Rourke's number as she drove. "Evan, it's Mara Lopez. I'm on my way to the station. I have a new lead, a credible one." Mara's car pulled into the familiar parking lot of the Orlando Police Department. The Florida heat hit her as she stepped out, but she barely felt it. Inside, the blast of air conditioning and the smell of stale coffee were the scents of her long vigil. The desk sergeant nodded at her with weary familiarity, and she walked straight up to Rourke's office. She found him at his desk, looking surprised. She didn't sit down. Standing in the middle of his cluttered office, she recounted the phone call from Sophie Van Dyke, watching his expression shift from deep skepticism to a flicker of cautious interest. "A woman in Amsterdam claims she saw Lila at a bar," Mara finished, her voice steady. "She identified a piece of jewelry that was never part of the public record." To her astonishment, Rourke's lips curved into something other than a frown. "We just got the notification from the Interpol Bureau," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The Amsterdam police have received a formal statement from a Sophia Van Dyke. They're running a check on the area. The FBI has also been looped in." Relief and anxiety washed over Mara in equal measure. "So it's real. She really did it." Rourke nodded, turning to his computer. He pulled up a file. "The report is detailed, matches Lila's description perfectly, right down to the pendant. It lends the claim significant credibility." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice urgent. "How long until we hear something?" His expression turned serious again. "The Amsterdam police are canvassing the area where Ms. Van Dyke saw her. But Mara," he paused, his tone gentle but firm, "we need to be realistic. International cases are complex. Bureaucracy, time zones, different procedures. It's slow." Her mind was already 10 steps ahead. "I can't wait. What if I fly there? I can help. I can talk to this woman, Sophie. I can be on the ground." Rourke's brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Mara, remember Hawaii. I cannot in good conscience advise you to fly into a situation like this alone. It could be dangerous, and statistically, the odds of this being Lila are still incredibly low." Frustration flared. She knew the risks, but her gut, a long-dormant instinct, was screaming at her to go. "I can't just sit here and wait for a call, Evan. I have to do something." He sighed, the sound of defeat. "Let the Amsterdam police do their job. We'll update you the second we know anything." Mara walked to the door, her decision made. "Thank you, Detective, for everything." "Mara," he called after her, "please, be careful. Don't do anything rash." She nodded without turning back. In the oppressive heat of the parking lot, she pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She found a flight to Amsterdam, leaving in just under 3 hours. The little voice of reason whispered that she was chasing another ghost, but the detail of the seashell pendant shouted it down. With a deep breath, she booked the one-way ticket.